Hello, welcome to the walking tour, The People and Politics. This walking tour discusses the importance of ordinary people in creating Argentine political systems, through statues representing everyday people to a plaza where the people of Argentina have engaged in protest. Argentina's political history is nothing short of interesting. This walking tour begins with the people and is centered around everyday working people. Government systems do not just appear on their own, nor do the rulers of that government. By showing the first site of Spanish colonization and the present-day presidential workplace, this walking tour will walk one through a brief history of how the Argentine government has evolved by the people and for the people. Without the determination of the local people, there would be no democratic government or culture of political participation and vocalization. Our first stop is the working class, scooter riding friends, Negrazón y Chaveta. Our first stop is the working class scooter friends named Negrazón y Chaveta. Representing two ordinary people, these comic strip characters represent ordinary Argentinians. The start of this walking tour wants to put the viewer in the shoes of an Argentinian. Now a democracy, the Argentinian people are responsible for helping to shape the country's politics. However, times have not always been so easy for the Argentine people. After the Great Depression hit in 1930, the military staged a coup against the democratically elected president Hipólito Yrigoyen. This thus began the next 70 years where more military coups would take place than democratic rule. The second military coup took place in 1943, then 1955, then 1962, then 1966, and 1976. The first four coups established temporary dictatorships, while the coups of 1966 and 1976 were permanent, based on a bureaucratic authoritarian state model. Citizens during this time were subject to human rights abuses through massive legal detentions, torture, and disappearances as enabled by the state. Being a resident of Argentina did not always feel safe, and the dictatorships reaffirmed this fear, enabling the dictators to do as they wish. Everyday civilians were not safe. Between 1976 and 1983, there is thought to have been at least 30,000 civilian people that disappeared at the hands of the government. These systematic yet secret disappearances and deaths were targeted to those who were suspected of supporting the left-wing agenda, which undermined the dictatorship. These injustices are part of the reason that Argentinians are incredibly vocal about politics, which we will address further at a later stop. But during the time of the dictatorship in 1971, the characters Negrazón and Chaveta were created by Alberto Cognigni of Cordoba to represent typical people of the time. Eventually becoming full-on comic book characters, the humorous style in which these characters were portrayed helped to lift spirits in Argentina's capital. Now, these comic books are not directly linked to an improved quality of life, but once again picture yourself in the shoes of a worried Argentinian of this time period. Despite being concerned about the dictatorship, wouldn't it be nice to be able to forget about it for a few minutes while reading a cute comic? These comics reminded people of the good things in Argentina and what normal life was supposed to look like. Negrazón and Chaveta were created in 1971 by Cognigni to represent two typical working-class individuals. Located within Paseo de la Historieta, this comic strip walk is dedicated to Argentine graphic humor and popular comic strip characters. Negrazón and Chaveta are characters from Alberto Pio Cognigni, and are depicted riding a motorbike through the city. Within Alberto Cognigni's comic books, Negrazón and Chaveta were always represented a low social class and working class people from Cordoba. Pictured on a Puma motorbike, which was a large component and popular production piece created during Argentina's industrial era. Argentina's industrial era began at the turn of the 20th century when the country attracted many European immigrants and experienced increased prosperity. However, at the beginning of the century, elites dominated various industries: beef, wool, and leather. Fast forward to 1950. During his presidential term, President Juan Domingo Perón had dreams of an industrialized New Argentina. Before his presidency, Perón had been a key player in the military junta of 1943, and following this junta in 1946, inherited the growing wartime economy and likely post-war depression. Perón knew of the possibility of similar outcomes of World War I, where post-war commercial dumping from various countries was the cause of bankrupting Argentine manufacturing companies who were successful during the war based on war needs. Perón's focus on Argentine industrialization was both economical and social. Industrialization would ideally bring the poor and middle class jobs, while creating a name for Argentina amid fluctuating economic stability and military juntas. In addition, Perón wanted to protect the Peronist labor alliance from unemployment caused by industry failure. It seems as though Perón was using his political power to protect the lower and middle class, but we must remember that Perón was still the president and ultimately wanted to protect his political appeal and encourage citizens to vote for him come the time for the next election. This is what brought forth Perón's 5-year plan of 1947, shortly after the central bank was nationalized on June 4, 1946. Within the plan, Perón spoke of a largely economic plan and stated that it penetrates every department of Argentine life from the 3 angles of government, national defense, and general economy, which ultimately attempted to increase the national income, begin national reconstruction and development, and improve the national defense and economy. The 5-year plan created by President Perón was concerned with policymaking in order to benefit the lower and middle classes, an initiative previously ignored by the government. With the lower and middle classes now being included in social policy, citizens' spirits lifted. Although it was not much later that Negrazón and Chaveta were created and became popular, they came to symbolize much of the working class. Cognigny helped create a small utopia within the daily life of Argentinians throughout times of political contention, especially during the dictatorship. Recognizing Negrazón and Chaveta as some of the average working-class individuals of the 20th century and the Peronist era of Argentine political history highlights the importance of the lower and middle class in creating political systems. The working people of Argentina were needed to build the national defense, develop roads, oil fields, ports, electricity, and architecture industries, and ultimately develop Argentina's economy. Without the working class, it is hard to know whether any country could make progress. Although at times the lower and middle classes were silenced while the government had a more powerful voice, these soon meshed during the Peronist era of Argentine politics. Although this disappeared with the establishment of a dictatorship, that did not change the necessity of the working class. Despite their silence, they were always needed. Let us continue to stop 2. Stop 2. Cabildo de Buenos Aires. The second stop of the walking tour is the Cabildo de Buenos Aires. This is our second stop on the walking tour in order to present how people shaped the politics of Buenos Aires. Located at the edge of the Plaza de Mayo, the Cabildo de Buenos Aires was the location of Spain's colonial administration. The Cabildo was originally composed of a group of collegiate members who would perform any broad array of governmental duties, ranging from legislative, judicial, administrative, and police and military functions. At the time of Spanish colonization, in order for a city to be named a city, it was required to have a cabildo. The cabildo was originally built in 1580, but construction was not finished until 1751. This building is one of the oldest in the whole city of Buenos Aires. It is one of the few constructions from the 18th century that is still standing. The building is important to Argentine political history as it served as an administrative building during the first